are online. I realize formatting with some of these slide things gets a little wonky. So they're currently up there. Let me pop this in the Zoom chat so anybody can grab the link. Oh, sorry, it takes me a second because now I got to find the Zoom chat again.
Once you start sharing your screen, it's hard to do that. Chris, do you welcome questions during, or would you like people to hold their questions till the end?
You beat me to it. I was going to say, okay. Feel free to stop me at any point as we chat through this, and I'll be happy to take questions. This is a little bit lower level, so if you're looking for something really high-end security, this probably isn't the talk for you. Just want to save you some time if that's what you came here for. This is a lot of basics with WordPress security, but gets a little bit more outside of WordPress and ways to help things out. So given that, a little bit about myself, I am a senior software engineer at WP Engine. I came out about 3 years ago to actually build desktop software, what was called DevKit at the time, which was our equivalent of Local by WP, if you're familiar with that. And then, well, we bought Local, and that kind of killed my project. These days, I work on the e-commerce team. Not a lot of WordPress on that team, although I'm getting more involved with different WordPress projects around the company. I've been around with WordPress security now for over 10 years. I originally built what's now iThemes security. At the time, it was Better WP security until I sold it to iThemes back in 2013. So that was, when I sold it, it was still on the first page of most popular WordPress plugins, and it did pretty well for me. And it really helped out a lot of people. I've taught for St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, computer security in the computer science program. Today, I focus a lot on privacy and developer experience. And historically, I actually came into this before everything else. I was a pilot. In fact, my interest in security kind of stems back to 9/11. It was my first day as a professional pilot. So yeah, not only should that have been a career sign, the security measures we learned very quickly after that really did lead into kind of an interest in security when I started switching back over during the next recession. So the picture on the right is actually from WordCamp Utrecht in the Netherlands. That was a keynote address I gave about 2 years ago. So I've spoken at a whole lot of WordCamps around the world on oftentimes security and privacy, and branching out to a few other topics. Enough about that. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about 3 different types of ways to look at your security. We're going to talk about protecting your site with some simple services and tools. This is the stuff you're used to seeing, install a security plugin, do this, do that to protect it. But it's not the only part of this. So we're going to branch out into detecting when something goes wrong, and then some tips in order to help you easily recover when something happens. So instead of thinking of this, most times when we talk about security products and somebody tries to sell you a security product in the WordPress space, all they're talking about is the protection. They don't, even backups, they tend to try to present you from a point of view of you're protecting your site. What typically happens in that case then is when something goes wrong, it's not you that notices it, it's your client that notices it, or your customer that notices it. And then how do you recover for it? You lose all that time trying to get things recovered back for them. So we're going to break that down a little bit and bring some tools involved with each of them. And the whole point of this is to protect your customers and protect your data, protect your privacy, and then protect that for your customers. This isn't a privacy talk. I've given quite a few of those as well. Privacy often talks about the why. Why are we protecting data? Why do I protect your username? Why do I protect your password? Why is the email address you've given me something that needs to be protected? This is more worried about the how on the security side of things. So it's a little bit different. There is a lot of overlap between privacy and security. But when we break it down, there really are two different reasons, 2 different approaches to data. Security will address 3 different things. It'll address availability of the data. It'll address accuracy of the data. And it'll address authentication, who can get to the data itself. Is Michelle allowed to access that data? Is the data that Michelle accesses the data she expected to get? That's the accuracy. And is it available? If Facebook goes down because of what they call a DDoS attack, that would be a security attack against availability. So we're going to talk about things to try to help you protect it in all these different ways. And we're going to break it down over a few different layers. We can talk about the network, which is the internet traffic before it even gets to your site. This involves your computer in some cases, the network, the Wi-Fi network you're connecting to it from, all kinds of different levels that we can involve here. We'll talk about the server a little bit. This is the host where you have your site at. Excuse me. For many people, this is, the WP Engine or Kinsta or Pagely or whatever host you have. And a lot of these days abstract a lot of the security, but there are still things that you can watch out for when you're doing this, especially if you're dealing with a host, that the 295 special that you see advertised. There's definitely some security options we can help you set that'll make things a little bit better for you. And finally, if they get through all these other levels, they get through your network, they've gotten through the host, we'll talk about security in the application a little bit. This is the plugin that you apply to WordPress. These are the tricks and tweaks that you do to your WordPress site itself to help improve the security there. So does this make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions at this stage? Okay, keep moving then. So in order to get to the network and that, let's talk a little bit about securing your computer, because most of the traffic coming in is coming in from your computer or somebody else's computer. This device that I put up is called a Wi-Fi Pineapple. You can buy this online. They start at $100. And this thing, all it does is mimic the network that you're in. So if you're sitting in Starbucks, this will say it's Starbucks Wi-Fi, and it'll just intercept all the traffic and log all the traffic that comes through it. I've actually seen these at WordCamps. WordCamp Orlando, we caught somebody with one back in, I think this was 2015 or 16. It's been a little while, but they are out there and they are something people can use along with all other kinds of devices to intercept traffic that comes in and out of your computer. So that means we have to protect the computers that we're accessing WordPress from. An awful lot of hacks, when somebody gets in your password, when somebody can get a hold of your credentials, when somebody can get into your data, oftentimes the social engineering hacks are working with your computer. They're not they're not hitting your site 10,000 times. They're going to you and trying to get that data from you. So you want to make sure your computer is at a minimum, secure as possible. And these are just some basics. Any modern operating system, whether you're Mac, Windows, or even Linux, has a firewall built in these days. You want to make sure you have that turned on. Disk encryption is the second one. Pretty much all three of the major operating systems and even your phones all have disk encryption available. If you're on iOS, this is just simply going into your security settings and turning on encryption. Same with Android. Mac, it's right in your system preferences. Windows, it was called Bitdefender. I haven't used a Windows computer in years, so that very well could have changed, but I know it's for a fact it's still in Windows with disk encryption. And even Linux, you can turn this on. Chances are, if you boot your computer and before you get to your login screen and asks for a password to unlock your hard drive, that's how you know you have the full disk encryption on. Mac and Windows sometimes obscure that a little bit these days because they'll combine the password with your other stuff, but there's ways you can lock that down to make sure that the entire disk, the idea here is if somebody gets your computer, they can't read the passwords off of it. And then finally, account protection, just making sure that your accounts are locked down, strong passwords. If you're using a mobile device, make sure you're using a full password and not just your fingerprint or your face or something that could easily be broken into or forced to give, so they could force you to give up depending on where you're at. So these basically, the big thing is use the options that you have in whatever device you have and make sure everything is turned on. Once your computer is locked down like that, and just the basics, the next biggest thing with dealing with WordPress is often to make sure you're using a VPN. You'll see these advertised as ways that you can get on Netflix. If you're in Canada and you want US Netflix, this is how you get US Netflix. That's a valid use. You see them sold for privacy, not as worthy in most cases. What these protect and what they're really good at for protection in this level is two things. First, it's going to protect you on Wi-Fi. If somebody had that Wi-Fi Pineapple, or there used to even be a thing a couple of years ago where it was called Firesheep. It was a Firefox extension that would just listen for traffic that wasn't over HTTPS and read it, like your Facebook credentials, and it would show a list in the sidebar of all the accounts it picked up, and then you can just imitate those accounts. That's actually what started the whole shift for everybody being forced to, all these sites forcing HTTPS, but there's still an awful lot of sites out there that don't use it. On top of that, a VPN can also lock down your site, or your access to sites to only that computer. For instance, the servers I keep my stuff on, my personal site's at WP Engine right now, but for everything else I have servers at a place called Hetzner, which is just a rent a server place. I can only log into those servers if I'm connected to my VPN's IP address. So all it's doing is wrapping your connection, wrapping what you're transmitting to and from the internet in its own packets and then sending it out from its servers. So it's really good at protecting your Wi-Fi if you're on unprotected Wi-Fi. And it's really good at making sure that whatever data you're transmitting or receiving, nobody can eavesdrop on you. So just like this says, accessing resources without encryption, without hackers. If you share passwords, getting it elsewhere. Two examples of this. These things change a lot, what servers I recommend to use. Because it seems like anyone you see on a TV commercial is probably going to get popular and get really slow in about a year, is my experience. So what I recommend these days is two things. First, don't ever use a free one. If there's, if you go to the app store on your phone and it says free VPN for privacy, don't do it. It's most likely siphoning your data. Same goes with the ones from Facebook, the ones from some of these others. They're designed to this is what they call a man in the middle. They've now intercepted everything. So just like that Wi-Fi pineapple, a bad actor could intercept everything that's going through it. So make sure you're using a reputable company. The most reputable company I recommend right now is Proton VPN. They also do have a mail service, actually, you might have heard of, called Proton Mail. They're based out of Switzerland, and they really do a good job with the VPN service. You can connect to it from all over the world. Nice and fast so far, and decent prices. I think they're about $8 a month. If you want to get fancy with this and you're more comfortable with running your own server, the one in the bottom, Algo, will spin up on DigitalOcean, Hetzner, any of these servers. So for I think it's €249 a month is what I pay for Algo for my entire family to use a VPN, and then I have a static IP address for it off of my Hetzner server, and it's faster than any of the ones I've ever bought before. So it's a little bit fancier option there, but these are two options: Proton VPN or Algo if you want to do it yourself. And if you can set up WordPress, you can set up Algo. It's really not hard. The instructions are all there for it. But just two options for you in order to get started with the VPNs. Next thing we're going to talk about is passwords. This here is a password crossword puzzle that goes back a few years now. What this came out is when Adobe was hacked. All these passwords were stolen, and it came out that Adobe was trying to encrypt the passwords with their own homemade encryption, which really wasn't encryption at all. They were real easy to guess, and they were so easy to guess that somebody, and this is still online, but it's a crossword puzzle based on the most common passwords used by Adobe users. So that's just how bad some of these sites can be. So this is why when they tell you to use a password manager and use unique passwords, that's why. The key here is use a different password for every site. So that way, if your WordPress site's hacked, it's not the same as your banking site. It's not the same as your email. Or in the worst case, if you're selling websites, it's not the DNS register. It's not all your clients, the admin account to every client you have. I mean, we know, how many accounts that you have that could be valuable if the password was shared. Make sure you keep those separately. I highly recommend using a password manager to do it. And the two I recommend these days are either 1Password, which is really easy on the usability side, or Bitwarden, which is a little cheaper, doesn't quite look as nice, but very effective. And Bitwarden, just like Algo or just like WordPress, you can host yourself. So if you really want to get the whole, I don't trust the service that I'm using, recommend Bitwarden. I've hosted Bitwarden once, on my own server. Once again, it's a Hetzner server, but I've been using Bitwarden and 1Password for various combinations for things for a good few years now, and they're excellent. My whole family is on 1Password. Otherwise, I'd switch them over to Bitwarden. Can't really get my parents to want to switch that one anymore. But both of them do a very good job, and they'll make sure that you can use that unique password, set it to 20 or 30 characters, and you shouldn't have any problems with making sure if one site's compromised, they can't get into anything else. That's really all you're trying to protect with these types of things. Of course, even if they have a password, if you have two-factor authentication, you're going to go take that even a step further. Two-factor authentication is really a second factor. A password is a first factor. It's something you know. So now we want to augment something you know with something you physically have. The best way to do this is a hardware key. There's something called a YubiKey, which is what I use. And You've seen that when the bank says it's going to text you, that's two-factor. You have to have your phone with you. In most cases with Gmail, with GitHub, with all the big sites, mine says press the button on my key and plug it into the computer. And that's how easy it is. 1Password and Bitwarden, for the ones that are the Google Authenticator, they can actually replace that Google Authenticator app. So if you lose, if you ever use Google Authenticator for these and you lose that app, you're kind of out of luck. If you put them in 1Password and Bitwarden, or even I think LastPass has some functionality with this, but it's been a long time. But that'll allow you to keep it secure in your password manager. You can get to it from any of your devices, and you can still go from there. I say YubiKey is probably your best bet here, and can even do more than two-factor, or it can do other kinds of authentication. But make sure you're using that Google Authenticator method. Save it with your 1Password if that's the easiest for you. Just use something besides just passwords to make sure everything's secure for you. When we talk about passwords a little bit, I just want to reemphasize the whole, this kind of goes against the whole thing of a password manager these days. But the catch is, don't use these simple passwords. And this even counts on your mobile password. Don't do the four numeric pin lock. Use a longer password that you have to enter every few days. The catch is here, entropy. The longer the password and the more things that it has to guess, the longer it's going to take to guess it. Here it says 44 bits of entropy. It's going to take 550 years to guess at 1,000 guesses per second. 28 bits of entropy, 3 days. Just adding a little bit more to your password really does make a difference. So when you start looking into these 1Passwords and you use 150 character, 100 character randomized password, that's good. If somebody was trying to brute force that, which is they just go through and guess password after password, they're probably not getting into that account. You never need to memorize this because that's what a password manager does for you. You just click, command. There used to be a t-shirt that 1Password did for Mac. It was command / is my password, because it would enter it for you. It does make it a lot easier, and it makes it a lot easier to manage these things. Next big one, and this comes in really with WordPress, is make sure you're using a privacy screen. I've said in many WordPress conferences, even in the security talks, I used to sit there after my security talk and I'd move back into the audience and I'd warn the people in front of me, okay, your password is this, your password is that, change it. But things are available on a screen. All kinds of things that sometimes I don't want to see myself, people put on screens in conferences. These privacy screens, they reduce it so you have to look straight onto them, and they really do help. They're going to help you in a coffee shop. They're going to help you if you're working in an airport. They're going to help you if you're working at a WordCamp or a Meetup. So I do recommend it. Most of them are removable. So it's, you just either magnetic or they have some sort of sticky that you can kind of take on and off, but they're definitely worth it. If you're on Mac, they're easy to get. For everything else, you have to kind of, Mac's a standard size. Anything else, you have to kind of play games to get the right size. But there's still, you can get something that you can cut down for pretty much any laptop out there. So I do recommend it heavily. And then use some browser extensions when you're doing this, when you're browsing the web. Make sure you can, they're going to protect you against cross-site scripting attacks and possibly cross-site request forgeries. They can block ads, they can remove trackers, and they can protect your search history. And again, this just comes down to, if somebody gets a hold of that laptop and you're working on somebody else's site, maybe it doesn't need to be in the history. Maybe it's just something that, you have your browser settings and stuff set to log you out when you're done with that user. Whatever it might be, you're protecting your user's data at that point. So an ad blocker, I highly recommend. If you're on Safari like I am, there's one blocker here, does a great job. Chrome is malware, so I can't really recommend anything good for that anymore, but Firefox has uBlock Origin, and there's a few other good ones that really work well for Firefox. They tend to do as well these days at blocking malware and blocking malicious downloads as they're going to do for ads. So that's really what you're trying to do. You don't want somebody running crypto miners or other things on these sites. Let it get blocked. So that's why I highly recommend those types of things, like the privacy extensions.
Excuse me, Chris. You said something about Chrome. You can't say, you don't have anything to say about it anymore. What, would you tell us more about that, please?
Sure, Chrome is malware, pure and simple. Chrome's job is to mine your data for as much data as it can get off of you. As such, if you look at uBlock Origin on Chrome, they've changed even their ad blocker statuses over the last few months. Well, might be a little longer than a few months now, and block so they cannot block at the levels that they used to block. They're not nearly as effective. They're simply trying to mine as much data from you as they can. And a lot of these extensions that are going to help protect you from that are not going to work on Chrome as effectively. That's not all Chromium projects. There's Brave, there's Vivaldi, there's all kinds of Chrome-based browsers that if you need Chrome's rendering engine can work just fine. But Chrome itself is malware. Does that explain it a little bit, Michael?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting, very enlightening, very frightening.
If you think about what somebody would have told you in the 90s or 2000s, if you've been on the internet as long as me, about, I have a virus on my computer. It's recording everything I go to. That's exactly the purpose of Chrome these days, and that's my basis for saying that. One of the things you can do beyond your browser, regardless of what browser you use, and this will even help on Chrome, is upgrade the DNS on your network. You can do this on your phone. You can do this on your whole house network. You can set this in your router. Oftentimes you'll see them, there's ads going around for Cloud for use 1.1.1.1 for your DNS settings. DNS is what looks up anything you go to. So if I went to slides.chriswiegman.com, it's got to resolve to an IP address. That's what DNS does. NextDNS is kind of a built-in ad blocker with DNS, and I highly recommend it as a replacement for what your ISP is using. It's the third fastest in the world when I looked it up on DNSPerf the other day, so it'll be faster than what your ISP is using. Depending on your router, it'll prevent your ISP even from seeing what you're going to, and it's got built-in ad blockers. If I go to, on my own computer, I have Facebook blocked on our whole house network for various reasons. So if I went to facebook.com, it'll block it. It actually blocks somewhere between 15 and 20% of all network traffic on my home network. I keep it on my devices. I have it attached to my VPN, but it's blocking malware domains. It's blocking ads, and it's blocking all kinds of miners and things. So when I'm working on a client site, it's just one more way to know my computer's safe, and I'm not going to have to deal with any kind of crap. If my job's cleaning a client site that we know has been hacked, what's it downloading to your computer? Oftentimes it's phoning home and reaching out for something that it's going to download. Things like NextDNS can really help make that a little bit safer for you to deal with on your own site. So it's not free, it's $20 a year, but it's probably the best $20 I think I've spent in the last year. They've only been around about 1.5 years. So I highly recommend it as back it up as a backup to your normal ad blockers to block malware, and then something that you can use it will improve your network's experience at your house. Say we got into it because we have a 1 terabit cap with Comcast in Florida. And we were getting really close to that, especially with COVID. We both work from home and we stream, and it single-handedly cut about somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on when I look at it, of all of our network traffic, kept us under the cap for quite a few months during the pandemic. So that's been a nice little side benefit of the thing. So just something I recommend checking out. So that's your computer, that's the network, that's making sure the device you connect to your client sites with is as secure as possible. It's not uncommon. I've fixed many a hacked site where the hack came from the site owner uploading something that they didn't even know they have, or passwords that were compromised from a site owner, things like that. So watching and making sure your WordPress site is secure starts at your own computer is really what that comes down to. We can move into the network itself then. And now we're talking about the network that's connecting to WordPress. Of course, your site, your computer, your laptop's connected to the internet. Obviously, so is your WordPress site. So there are things that we can do to protect the network on that. And the first of them is a firewall between your website and the internet. So what you want to do here is take it and analyze all the traffic attempting to get to your website. Securi has what they call these web application firewalls. Probably your best bet is Cloudflare. This, you actually point your domain. So I would point slides.chriswiegman.com instead of the host. This is actually hosted on GitHub. I would post it to Cloudflare. and Cloudflare would intercept the traffic, do all the firewall thing and keep people out. We've probably all seen this. If you browse every once in a while, you get this site's protected by Cloudflare, go through the reCAPTCHA. That's exactly what it's doing. The downside to that is it is basically a man in the middle attack in itself. So if you have users in different countries, Cloudflare may not be the right solution for you. So I caution you before you automatically go turn this on every site, especially countries like India, a lot of the Middle East, Southern and Eastern Asia can be very difficult to get to if your site's behind Cloudflare. On the flip side, if all your traffic is US and European based, Cloudflare can actually speed things up. It'll cache your site for you and then replay it from its own cache servers like a normal CDN would. So now you're getting the security of their firewall and you're getting the benefits of their network speeds to pick it up. Does that make sense?
Yes. How about, what is it? Encrypt us in, oh heck, SiteGround uses it.
I haven't used SiteGround for hosting.
Let's Encrypt.
Let's Encrypt. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
We'll get to that one in just a couple minutes, so hold off on that one because I have a slide that's going to list Let's Encrypt specifically in a couple minutes here.
Great, thank you.
Now this is before it gets to your site. Keep in mind, this is before it gets to your host, is the idea of intercepting traffic here. So this is in separate of SiteGround. Some hosts like WP Engine and I think Liquid Web and maybe a few others actually have plans with Cloudflare built into them. So that your host may be offering this, but they're actually using a third party to intercept the traffic and then do the same thing that you would normally do. Here's where, next slide, I talk about a little bit about Let's Encrypt, and this is HTTPS. This is a little bit different. This is encrypting the traffic to the site itself. In theory, every site should probably have this. Now, even Google's saying it's basically a requirement. Most browsers are going to yell at you if you don't have this these days. And there's a couple different kinds of certificates you can get to do it. There's the free certificate from Let's Encrypt. Or you can go to your host or somebody like Gandhi and pay for a certificate. The big difference with these is trust level. If you pay for an SSL certificate these days, hopefully you're getting more than just the little lock like you can see on my browser. You're getting the green lock, like when you go to your bank and it shows up with the green lock and gives all the information about it. It's a trust level. That's the difference between different kinds of SSL certificates. So if you're paying for one, that's the only reason you would need to pay for something like that. It's the exact same protection. They're using almost identical algorithms. You can adjust the algorithms you use for security. So everybody's might differ a little bit, even with the same certificate, but they have all the same access to the security itself. This is protecting a single stream of traffic. So if I connect to Mike's site, this is protecting my view of Mike's site. If Michelle connects, she would have a separate set of encryption into Mike's site. The firewalls that I listed on the previous page intercept everybody and then pass that traffic back. In fact, they terminate. If you have HTTPS and you use Cloudflare, Cloudflare will terminate that encryption and then get things passed on from that. Does that make a little more sense, Mike?
Yes, yes.
Good. So I do recommend, make sure a lot of hosts offer this. We have it built in at WP Engine. I'm really not trying to make this a commercial for WP Engine. I just don't use too many hosts anymore. Many hosts do have this built in. I know Liquid Webs, Kinstas, most of these are going to have it. And most of them, if they have it built in and it's free, are probably just getting their certificates from Let's Encrypt anyway. For a while, Let's Encrypt was kind of slow to build because it took Apple more longer than anybody to trust it. All these certificates have what they call a parent that needs to be trusted by your browser. So it's not just the host and your website that says, okay, I have a good certificate. Your browser has to have a database of all the good certificates and what they call their parent or root certificates and say, okay, we know that we can trust it because so-and-so issued the certificate. So that's how these certificates work, is they're actually looking in your browser and saying, hey, is this a good certificate? Okay, well then establish the secure connection and then everything going to and from is going to be protected. You want to have these if you have any kind of form. You want to have these if you're passing any kind of sensitive information back and forth. Maybe you have a medical site and somebody's given you, symptoms, whatever it might be, something that could be very personal. Even if it's not personal, you want to protect their interaction with you. It's a trust thing. But this type of thing is what's going to protect that data in transit from their computer, whether they've got a VPN, whether they're on the world's worst Wi-Fi connection, whether Wi-Fi pineapples intercepting all their data. HTTPS is what's going to protect that data and go through all those methods between a single website and the person. Does that make a little sense to everybody?
Maybe somewhat analogous to a HIPAA statement, right?
HIPAA gets in a little bit different territory because with HIPAA, now you're talking legal requirements for how they, not just how data is transmitted,
Yeah.
but also how data is stored at rest. So HIPAA is a little bit different. To use HTTPS, there's no BAA agreement or anything like that, like there would be with HIPAA or FERPA. It's simply just that encryption layer. HIPAA will utilize, in order to be HIPAA compliant, you will utilize HTTPS. But HTTPS itself has nothing to do with HIPAA.
I understand, right? I was just making an analogy.
Okay, sorry. Next thing is protect the domains. One easy way to take over a website is to get access to your domain name. Redirect the website. You could get access to all kinds of things if I have access to your domain name. If you have a popular domain name and I was able to gain control of it, what would that be worth to you to get it back? Your client's 30-year business, somebody takes control of that domain name and transfers it out on you. A couple ways to make sure that you secure this. The first thing is watch your TTL, and TTL is time to live. TTL is whenever we talk about dealing with DNS, TTL is what, every time you have a DNS problem, everybody says, oh, it's DNS's fault. You switched over the client. What's going to go wrong? It's always DNS that goes wrong, right? 90% of the time, the reason DNS goes wrong is this TTL. This is telling every DNS server that it sees or that asks for your domain to remember where that domain lives for as long as the TTL is set. 86,400 seconds is 1 day. So this is saying every time I look up slides.chriswiegman.com in a DNS, remember where it is for 1 day. If somebody got a hold of my domain, there's a better chance that things would still be redirected. It would, I'd have in many cases some time, a buffer in there in order to restore things without things going bad, without clients necessarily seeing it. Of course, don't share your domain account with other services, especially email. So if you're using Gandhi.net as your registrar, who's the one I recommend these days, don't also use their email accounts, because how do you reset a domain? Through email. They email you all these fancy codes, they email you other things to get control of the domain. If you're using a custom domain for your email, this would be one of the best ways to cause you problems. If I use chriswiegman.com on my email address and somebody wanted to get into things, redirect my email via DNS, I might not even know it for a while. And any kind of password reset's going to go off to the attacker. So that's why things like DNS and making sure that these TTLs and things are separated are so valuable. Of course, use two-factor on all possible accounts, whether they're DNS, WordPress accounts, or anything else. So in other words, put it on your site as well. If your registrar should have DNS or two-factor at this point. Some registrars like Gandhi will actually can restrict yourself to logging in from a given IP address. I can't log into my domain registrar unless I'm connected to my VPN. So there's a lot of restrictions there that can help secure things. You can add two-factor to WordPress itself, depending on how you have things configured with these two plugins, wordfence.com or the two-factor plugin. But make sure you're using two-factor on all this to prevent access. If they get a hold of your email address, which is probably what they're going to want with a DNS attack, even with a password reset, if you have two-factor, it may still be enough to protect your account. So make sure that you have this stuff on to protect against these type of attacks. So let's talk about getting in the network. Now, once they get to the server, things change a little bit. And the first thing to do on most accounts is avoid FTP. FTP is an old technology, and this is how we used to upload our WordPress files into the server. If you're using, we still have it available to you on WP Engine. You can get it on Bluehost, Kinsta. Most of these sites have FTP. It's file transfer protocol. It works. It does the job. but it's insecure. It transmits your password and username and all your information just in plain, unencrypted, plain text over the network. So if you're not on a VPN and you're on an open Wi-Fi and this is intercepted, now somebody knows how to get into your server. You want to replace it with SFTP or SSH. And usually it's the same client. If you use FileZilla, these can connect over SFTP or SSH file transfer protocol, the same as regular FTP, only now everything's encrypted when you do it. Often the catch with these is the secure ones, typically you have to ask your host to turn them on still these days. You either have to set up in a separate username and password, flick a switch, give it a security certificate or some method of turning it on. So be careful how you do that. If you do turn it on and they want you to set up passwords, I highly recommend using what they call a key pair. Key pairs are essentially two passwords that only work together. So I give you my public side of the password. You encrypt something, you send it to me. Only my private side can decrypt it. And I keep a private key. So if I encrypt something and send it back to you, anybody with that public knows it comes with my public key, knew it comes from me. Does that make sense? Sorry, head's a little weird tonight. So I know I'm talking, having a hard time getting words out. So I apologize, but did that make some sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that
Okay.
definitely makes sense. For RCA would be like a good example of a key pair in this case, right? Using that.
Exactly. RCA, RSA. Usually your hosts.
I didn't mean to RSA, yes.
Yeah, I missed it too, so it's all good. Oftentimes your host will have instructions on how to generate these things, but you can, typically what you'll do is you'll generate it on your laptop, put the public key on each one of your client's hosts, and then you don't even have to think about connecting again. That same public key can be attached to 30 different websites on 30 different hosts if you want to. If you have that YubiKey, like I mentioned in the slide earlier, you can actually put your private key on the YubiKey and use that to connect to all kinds of things. As long as my key's plugged in, it doesn't matter what laptop I'm using. I can get to any of my sites anywhere they live. So it's more secure, and it's frankly a much easier way to handle it once you get things set up. And just like WordPress, if you can set up WordPress, you can set up a key pair to handle this stuff. Another thing to do on your host is avoid unlimited accounts. That $295, install 15, as many sites as you want, sounds like a great deal until one of those sites is just something you wanted to mess around with. So you leave it sit there and a year later it gets hacked because you haven't kept it updated. And then all those other 14 sites you have on the account are compromised as well.
Well, that's never happened to me. Never. Yes, it has.
There's only one remedy on this. Every site should have its own account. Anytime you connect files, anything that can be get into with the same reach with the same set of credentials can be compromised in the same breach. So make sure that you're avoiding, unlimited traffic is one thing, or unlimited visitors or whatever, unlimited disk space if you have some photo site. But don't host more than one site in these things, regardless of what how good the advertisement sounds, because that's asking for trouble. It's real easy to hey, this is neat. Let's try this in a site. Forget it's there. And then that old site becomes compromised. The biggest security vulnerability in WordPress today is obsolete plugins and themes, hands down. Leaving something, forgetting a site that you put up is what's going to cause you problems. So keep them all separate so that the site that you forget, it might still get hacked, but it's not going to take down everybody else with it.
The other thing, if I can interject, Chris, is if you have customers who have access to their own websites, keep track of what they're doing on the website too, because I had one that added 5 different plugins for the same thing and then just used the one of them, but left those other ones on there. And so those became a vulnerable area.
Mm-hmm. Some plugins historically you don't even need to have activated. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But the Tim Thumb attack, which was the famous attack that actually led to the WordFence plugin, who at the time was my biggest competition. But you didn't even need to plug it. All you needed was a theme or a plugin that had the file. Didn't need to be activated, and it could still compromise your whole site. So you definitely want to clean out that old obsolete stuff and don't connect them together. On your server, if you have it available to you, use a hardening service. This is usually for fancier accounts. This is the type of thing where you're going out to Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud and you're hosting yourself. Fail to ban is probably the best, most well-known one out there. It watches server logs, and if somebody hasn't logged in successfully, it'll record that. It'll actually add entries to your server's firewall and block them. So it's very effective, and it's doing it at the server before they get to WordPress. So WordPress you don't have to expend PHP resources. You're not going to risk crashing the site. It'll simply get blocked at the server level with very little resources involved. And it can really help in a long-term attack or a heavy attack if they are trying to brute force you. Of course, that doesn't work if you don't have your server firewall turned on. Any managed host is probably using both of these days. So if you're using a WP Engine or Kinsta or Pagely, most likely your host has a firewall and some version of a fail to ban like implementation. But if you're doing this yourself and hosting your own stuff, these are two things I highly recommend turning on. Fail to ban is if you on any Linux server, which is what most people are using, you install it, you install a plugin with instructions with the config file for the server, and you just let it run. It's really pretty simple. It takes about 10 minutes to install. I'm not going to say it's as simple as installing WordPress, because frankly, it's a little more difficult. But if you're already at the point where you're doing your own servers, this is definitely something I recommend doing. And then finally, we're through the servers. Now let's talk about protecting the application. Keep in mind, if it gets to your application, we're almost too late here. Every step, think of a castle. You have the moat. If they get across the moat, then they storm the walls. If they get through the walls, then you finally get to the keep in the center of the castle. Now you're at the keep, and as far as we're talking about with WordPress, if they get to the application. Once attacker gets the application, prevention is often too late. So now we're going to turn our focus to a couple different things: detection and recovery. Of course, the biggest part you can do, there's still a little protection, and the biggest part of it is keeping things up to date. Turn on automatic updates. Use WordFence or something like main WP or your hosts. You know, WP Engine, I hate even bringing the name up this many times in a talk. We have a feature called automatic plugin updates or plugin update manager, which will actually take screenshots of your site before, update the plugin, and then take screenshots afterwards and roll it back. And there's a number of hosts that'll do that for you now. So it's a little, if you don't trust the automatic updates that WordPress has built in, because maybe an update can break a site, then you can switch over to something that'll do, they call it regression testing. You're looking for a regression of usability after the update's complete. And then ask your host if they have that available. It's usually an extra cost, but for an expensive site, it can really save your bacon and make sure things keep up to date. And then WordFence, main WP, all these things will email you notifications if you don't want to use automatic updates themselves, so you can take care of them right away. Of course, the other big thing is, especially if you're working with clients, know when things have a problem. If you use a site subscription service like a feed reader, like Feedly or InnoReader or one of those things, I highly recommend subscribing to both the WordFence blog and WP Security bloggers, because both of these are going to tell you about the latest vulnerability, oftentimes before you've even heard about the patch being up. Hey, there's a patch out there for XYZ for iTheme security. Why is there a patch? And you go check the blog. Oh, that patch is because they had a pretty bad security vulnerability. Let's make sure we get that fixed. So these are the news services that I trust more than most as far as knowing what's going on in the WordPress community. You don't have to read all this stuff. Just look for the headlines. Is this a plugin oh crap, that's the theme I use on 30 sites. Let's make sure all 30 sites are updated completely. So if you're managing sites for others, they become very valuable very quickly that way. Then finally, last line of defense, prevent brute force, password guessing, hardens configuration, all these types of best practices. WordFence is going to do that too. So I just listed WordFence for their blog. I've listed WordFence for their two-factor. I'm listing WordFence again because they're going to help you enforce some of the best practices. Best practices can be telling you when people logged in, preventing people from logging in when you don't want them to, different things like that, making sure that they can tell you how many accounts are admin accounts. If you're managing your client's site and you don't need admin access, there should only ever be one admin site an account. or one admin account on a site. Everybody else, even if you're managing that site for your client, everything you can do is say an editor should be done as an editor. You shouldn't be using that higher level authentication, that higher level user account unless you need it. And plugins, especially WordPress, does a really good job of helping you manage that type of thing. It can also help you detect attacks, but it's not the only way. Plugins have, they can say, oh, we think something's gone wrong. And how many times do we get these plugin notifications? Oh, we know that's not a problem. I was just in the site. And what this comes down to is, you know your site better than anyone. If a site is running slow, if there are users reporting problems, well, that's kind of an obvious one. Does it look different? Are there extra logins, content changes, or is there a spike in traffic or spam? You know your site. If you go into Google Analytics one day and you see that, your normal day you have 5 users and you had 20,000 users yesterday, you didn't publish anything new. That's probably not that your site suddenly went on Forbes and got famous from your 6-year-old content. It's probably because somebody hacked you. Know what these numbers are, keep track of them, and look at those things. Look for those unusual things that are happening on your site over time. You are by far the best detection of a problem on your site, or oftentimes even your client's site. As you launch a site, training your clients, training the users that are going to be using it to look for these types of things is one of the best things you can do on top of your maintenance plan to making sure that it keeps safe. Part of when I was doing sites myself, part of the launch process was a half hour to an hour, depending on the client, of training on these are what you're looking for to see if there's any problems later. And it's not just the obvious, it's the looking at Google Analytics. How do they get to their Google Analytics or whatever analytics they might be using? How do they find this data, and look, what's a spike? Over time, things are going to keep growing. So what are they looking for that's going to signal a problem? That type of training is going to go a long way. They may still find a hack, but now they're going to tell you about the hack before they have to tell their 10,000 users, or hopefully maybe before it winds up on Google's red page of death. And you know how hard it can be to remove a site once it starts being flagged in the browser. So the idea here is you want to detect the problem before somebody else does. And again, there's some external detection tools that can help you with this type of thing. These run independently from your site. You don't necessarily want to trust your site to tell you it's hacked if somebody's gotten into it. There's plugins that tell you, and I'll show you in a minute, once it'll tell you if a file's been changed, but all that stuff can be spoofed. So you want to look at external services, New Relic, Google Search Console, or Jetpack. All 3 of these have services that are going to tell you when a problem's happened. So turn on something that's monitoring. Is the site up? Is there a problem with the site? What's going on? Things that are going to be that first line of, or that last line of defense, but that second line of detecting what a problem is. I personally really respect New Relic. If you have a large site and you're trying to deal with it on any kind of level, it's not cheap to do it right. But this isn't just going to detect problems with hacking, but it's going to give you all kinds of performance. And it'll tell you every MySQL query, for example, on your site, every function call, and help you tune this thing in order to run it better. So if you're the type of technical developer that's really digging down into a long-term project, New Relic is by far one of the best things you can add to a site to keep track of what's going on with your site's performance. And it can help you find these types of anomalies that are going to help, that can happen when a site gets hacked. And some of the internal detection tools, like I say, detect file changes. WordPress does a great deal. iTheme Security used to, and it used to do that. I couldn't confirm if it still does. iTheme Security also, though, can watch user actions. It has things to start like WP Stream to log, Jane logged in and changed the site, or Michelle logged in again and deleted all her content. Now we got to go fix it. It'll log all these user actions so you know on a user level who's messed up. When I first built iTheme Security, I built it in a university setting where we had student workers that would log in. It was night flight. It was for a flight school, and they'd have night flight till midnight a couple nights a week. And it's always when they would log in and post something stupid on the front page of the blog to say, this is where the party was. So now we'd start, who's logging in And we actually put in features such as away mode where you could turn it off after hours. So if you're doing a site for, say, a doctor's office and they're not there beyond 9 to 5, there's a feature in iTheme security called away mode that can keep people out, not just it'll detect who's doing what, but can also prevent logins and things like that after hours. So these changes can't be made at all. They come in that depending on your environment, that can be a very handy tool to have to prevent users internally. Just somebody malicious. Maybe it's just somebody having a bad day or didn't get the promotion they want. We've all seen this type of thing. If you forget the accounts there and they can still log in, now you'll know where the problem went. You can fix it a little bit easier. That's all great, but we still need to have a good backup. The first step with the recovery is having something to recover. Your host probably offers you backups. If that's your only backup, you're probably going to get in trouble pretty quickly. Host backups are notoriously unreliable in many cases. On top of that, if they can get into your site, how did they get into your site? If they got in through your host, perhaps they've had access to the backup already. So you want to keep a backup separate from the host itself. WordPress, which is made by Automatic, or Backup Buddy by iThemes are two excellent products for this. They're going to simply make copies of your site and move them elsewhere. There's also main WPs, the infinite WPs. A lot of those types of control panel sites will do this for you as well. But the real key here is make sure you have a backup that is not associated with the site. And of course, on top of that, make sure you verify the backup. Oftentimes, sites that I've recovered.
I'm on some meeting. I'll be there in about half an hour.
Oh, righty. But sorry. Oftentimes, sites I've recovered that I have a hard time recovering are somebody that comes to me and say, hey, I had a backup, but I can't figure out how to use it. Well, that becomes a problem very quickly. Verify that backup. If you have a staging site, if you had slides.chriswiegman.com, make up slidestest.chriswiegman.com as well and test your backup on it. Spin up, that's where even your unlimited plan, spin up a second site just to test the backup and then delete it afterwards.
Chris,
I would
can you
say
tell us the name again of what the software was, or I'm sorry, the .com service was WordPress.com. Thank you.
WordPress. And all these are in if you check the Zoom chat, these are all linkable. These slides are online too for afterwards. Don't worry too much about taking all the notes. I've made sure I put these up
It's
there
just a
for you.
habit, but thank you. Yeah.
Understand. So yeah, watch what that backup is. If it's a mission critical site and you're a developer, maybe code something that's going to test one of those backups once a month. I have done that with systems, with CI/CD systems. One of the CI/CD steps is to verify backups. I've done that on a number of sites in the past. So depending on what your experience level is, that can get pretty fancy, but the absolute minimum is check it once in a while. Oh, so-and-so just called me for the first time in 6 months. Well, my minimum charge is 2 hours. I'll spend 30 minutes of that verifying a backup before I change anything. It's actually not hard to build into a contract, I found, because if they haven't talked to you in 6 months, 2 years, whatever it might be, whatever your original contract was, is I do that work, but I want to make sure the backup's there before I change anything because I don't necessarily know what's going on in that site anymore. It tends to be a very easy sell to have that offline backup and to be able to verify it for a client. So it's something I highly recommend. And of course, the final stretch is just simply know who to call. Securi can repair a site for you. Hackrepair.com. WordFence has services that can do this. Maybe it's your host, depending on who's managing your host. But you're not the end site user. Now this is the site owner calling you. You need to have an answer to this question, whoever it might be, to solve the problem, because at some point, a site you manage will get hacked. If you have the expertise to fix that yourself, great. You are who they need to call. The buck stops with you. But if the buck doesn't stop with you, make sure you know what your backup plan is. Know what the prices are. Know what the turnaround times for some of these clients are. If Security can do this on average, it's $500, and it's completely off. I guess I have no idea what their fees are these days. I haven't looked in a long time. But if say their fee is $500 and it takes a week, and Hack Repair can do it for $300 in a day, know those differences and shop around and know who you can call for something reliable when the time comes. It's, you keep that magnet on your fridge with 911. I mean, we all know 911, but your plumber, when things go wrong, if you're dealing with client sites, make sure you also keep something around to know who to call when things do go wrong with that as well. So that's the end of it. That's quite a fire hose, I realize. We've been talking about an hour and I'm giving you a heck of a lot of links. Let's open it up and do some questions here. Slide linked again in case you need them.
We had some questions in the chat, and I failed to bring them forward while you were talking. But let's take a look at those now. So Trisha says that you recommended Proton VPN. They have a free version. Are you recommending the basic, plus, or free version? And how does that work?
The free version is a little bit slower. It tends to be a little less prioritized. If it works for you, try it. Where I had problems with Proton VPN's free one was some places block, they don't like VPNs on their network, so they'll block certain protocols. The free version of Proton doesn't have as many options, so it tends to be what I see blocked quickly. But I've also at times just paid for a month of Proton VPN and $8, and then I'm done with it the next month and I'm move on. So it depends on where you're traveling. That's also actually, if you do something like Algo, that can be a weakness with Algo. When I go back to Proton, it's because the port that my Algo server's on gets blocked by the network. So then I sign up for Proton again and use that for a month.
Gotcha. Mary Clark says, is it recommended to have a duplicate YubiKey?
Absolutely. I think I have 4 right now, but that's getting excessive because they bought me a new Mac with USB-C instead of regular USB. So I have 2 of each kind, but I do highly recommend having at least 2. That way, if one fails, you'll have a backup. All your social media accounts these days can use YubiKey. Twitter, Mastodon, Facebook, Google, GitHub, just about anything can use it. You can put 2 of them in there, and it really is fast when you get the hang of it. Plus, if you don't have a fingerprint reader, you can set it to do all the stuff the fingerprint reader would do for authentication. So
cool.
Press the YubiKey and you don't need a fingerprint reader anymore, which can come in extremely handy on some machines.
But we should be sure to register each YubiKey that we have. Otherwise it's useless. Yes.
Every site, when you sign up with a YubiKey, it'll say, basically it's asking which YubiKey do you have? So you have to register each copy that you have with each site. I actually keep a spreadsheet, so I know every site, what modes of 2-factor I have. So that way, if anything ever gets screwed up, I can go back and fix it. But then, when I replace a YubiKey, then I'll go back through all 50 or 60 sites and update it.
Deborah had a comment. She said, I had a new client with an existing website. They told me they had site backups, which was true, but didn't have access to the backups, and no one had the login credential for the site backups.
Yep, I've been there.
And then you said, that there's security, there's all your host, there's all these places you can call if you are hacked. And I just wrote, I just call Chris. And then Trisha said we should all call Chris. And then Tina said, thanks. So, but I'm the only one with your phone number. So.
Footnote, change phone number after meeting.
It's like ghost Michelle right after this. What other questions do people have for Chris today?
Chris, thanks for the presentation. Fantastic. What you've done. What I wanted to ask is you had your opinion on Chrome. How do you feel about the new Microsoft Edge? Because that's coming with everything. That's coming with all the new systems. So we have to deal with it no matter what.
It's not on my Mac.
Well, not intentionally. It's Microsoft will push it there someday.
I don't have a good answer, and so I don't want to comment as strictly. Microsoft, its Office product now, it's getting even worse than Google with some of its tracking. But I do not know. I can make no claims as to what it does with Edge, or what Edge does with it.
Okay, just ask an opinion. Thanks.
Should we write down our passwords on a yellow Post-it note and stick it on the edge of our computer? Or I don't think you talked about that at all.
If you have your home office and that's the password just for your That's what's going to get you to use a password manager.
Yeah.
There are worse ways to do it.
Don't stick it on the back of your laptop and go to Starbucks.
I have a spot in my house where I have on a piece of paper my emergency password list should my wife ever need them. And
There you go. Yeah.
nobody else is
Absolutely.
coming into the house. It's not shared.
Right.
You know, it's one thing to do that in an open office, right? When people are walking by or when you're at Starbucks. It's another thing if it's on your external monitor in your house. It's not leaving your house and it's not
Right.
facing a window, whatever. If
Mhm.
that's what's going to make you use the higher end security, I'm not going to say no to it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I was making a joke, of course, about public spaces, but no, but you make a good sense. You make a good point there. Yeah.
On that point, there's a website I heard about the other day. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it is offhand, but I was told it can be used to pass along key information like passwords, and it's a quick forget type thing. What do you think about something like that? That frightens me, but
I've used them before. 10up, which is one of the bigger WordPress agencies, has their own quick forget type thing. Frankly, usually these days, if I'm doing something like that, I use Signal with people or Keybase. However, I've used the quick forget stuff plenty of times. And as long as look who's running it, there's actually a hosted quick forget one. And it seems like they come up and they pop up and disappear pretty often. But if you know who's running it, or I think it's PHP even, run it yourself, at least you know what's behind it. That's far safer than an email or any other way that somebody's going to give you their password.
right, yeah, email is, I'd rather use a phone, but even that, I guess, is not as secure as we might think.
We use it for our customers that give WP all the time. So for example, today I had a customer who could not figure out why her license key wasn't working on her site. And as much as I could try through email to help her solve the problem, she was just flummoxed. And so I told her she could send me the quick forget. I logged into her website and realized that she was trying to put a license key on a third website. And I didn't have provisions for that. So I was able to fix it for her very quickly. But without having access, I wouldn't have been able to help troubleshoot that. So we do use that quite a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Somebody
I think that
just
is the one
shared-
we use. Yeah, Deborah, I think that's the one we use, is that one-time secret one. Yeah, that's a good one. Other questions for Chris? And I mean, Chris is kind of my guru when it comes to all things, code and WordPress and stuff. So if there's other questions outside
I
of
take no
security,
responsibility.
and he's willing to kind of hang in for a few minutes. So, the second half of our meetup, we always just kind of open it up to general discussion. Chris, if you haven't had dinner yet and you need to run, I completely understand. But if you want to hang in with us a little while longer, we might have some other questions that you might be interested in too.
Sure,
So,
I'll hang out for a bit.
all right.
I've got a
Thanks, Jim.
question.
Okay, Jim.
And I'm, from a non-technical perspective, about a month and a half ago, all of a sudden I started getting hundreds and hundreds of bounced email notifications to, luckily, one of my low volume sites. And, I went to SiteGround and they did something to a DNS or whatever. Well, it went away for a couple of weeks and then it came back. So I called SiteGround again and they did some more things. Anyways, it took me 3 tries with SiteGround before I finally got to a guy who said, well, we got to go through these 4 steps to basically let the world know that, these emails are not coming from you. And it's knocked down the traffic. But now I'm getting these email messages that say, no reply, DMARC support from google.com, and it's a report domain, TC Spindles, so it's a report. Is this just informational for me, or is this something I have to be worried about, or what?
That's what's called a DMARC report. I wouldn't worry
Yeah.
about it. It means that they've actually configured the security in your DNS, which is a good thing. I'm going to pop a link in here where you can put your domain in and it'll tell you grade the security of it. And you'll see it's probably not all that bad. But I get those for all my domains. There's actually services you can pay for to process them for you. But Nah, it's probably not worth it in most cases. It's not going to hurt anything. That's what they should be doing. That means these services are bouncing emails appropriately and making replies back to you.
Okay. Great. Thank
Jim,
you.
I'm just popping the link in
The chat.
right now.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I just, this is all a foreign language to me, and I have no interest in learning it. I just wanted to know, they've eliminated the problem, which is good. I just wasn't sure what this report was, if it was an informational thing or something I needed to be, contact Steve or somebody to say, what does this mean? So, thank you.
You could probably ask them to direct it to a different email address, like an admin email address or something, if you don't want to deal with them. That's probably your best bet.
No, I'm not getting a lot of them.
Okay.
Compared to the hundreds and hundreds of emails I was getting a day when somebody in China or Russia or whatever had hacked my email address. So
Yeah. Okay, good.
One thing I would want to mention too, and this I don't think you mentioned this, Chris, although I have to admit I was multitasking a couple times because I was getting pinged in so many different places. But it's all well and good to have an SSL certificate on your site, but you still don't want to accept credit card numbers on your site unless they're going directly through to the payment processor. So you don't want to like have a form where you say, give me your credit card information, and then you're going to go and put it in through, through what do you call it? I can't think of the different, through your phone apps and things like that, right? So you don't want to enter that in PayPal. You don't want to be entering that in, what's the one that Square? Like you don't want to do any of that. You want to actually connect your forms through to the payment processor so that information passes through but doesn't get stored on your website. Because the last thing you want is having anybody's credit card information stolen through your website, because that's a huge, huge expense for you to have to fix all of that. So.
Quick question about HTTPS. For the certificates you'd pay for, would you just want to do that for like if you're doing like higher level transactions, not just for like your basic forms and stuff?
Yeah, like I wouldn't bother with it unless I was running a bank.
Yeah.
If you're some sort of financial service, then you need it. But short of that, there's really no reason for it anymore.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. I have a personal blog, or I'm going to, and as
soon as I finish building it.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I'm trying to sort out, I usually only log into my site at home. And I don't really plan on having anything on there except maybe for like a contact form and like an invite me on your podcast type thing. So pretty low risk. I'm just trying to sort out like what I'd need security wise. I had WordFence for my business site before a couple of years ago. I really liked it. So I would probably do that. Anything else you'd recommend for like bloggers who, for security, they're like, it's Greek to us.
Keep it as simple as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You want as little interaction as, if you can turn comments off, turn comments off. If you can do your contact
as well, yeah. If you're just doing a blog, you can like categorize things. If you can turn search off, that also helps.
Well, search is an interesting one because if you're interested in the sustainability,
right,
and green, search is actually better than a navigation menu.
Mm-hmm.
However, be careful. Simple WordPress search is pretty safe these days, but it's it's another form. If every form you can turn off is one less place people can input information, and they will try. There used to be a thing with WordPress where you'd hide the back end. You'd hide WP admin and stuff like that. And we did it. I managed to kill about 20,000 websites in a single update of iTheme security when I had that feature.
And the fact of the matter is,
the feature's garbage. It does absolutely nothing for security because all they're looking for is forms in general.
Right.
And there's a dozen ways these days to log into WordPress. There's the REST API. There's different types of plugins that might have things for you.
Yeah, there's plenty of ways people can look in the back end for like ways in. Just keeping a website simple, I'd say would be ideal.
Mhm. Yeah,
Well-
anything you can remove is going to be a good thing.
How about using CAPTCHA too?
If you have to have interaction, CAPTCHA can be helpful, but it can pose other issues, especially accessibility issues. Some of those CAPTCHA things are extremely difficult if you have a disability to get through.
Even
Okay.
for me, I find them difficult. Like I've messed them up. So if I can mess them up, then yeah, they're annoying. But they do the job.
Mhm.
They're just like, and they've gotten more elaborate and more annoying.
If
Especially the
I
ones
was-
that you have to pick all the pictures that have a bus in them.
Yeah.
Is the bus in this one or isn't it? I can't quite tell. It's kind
Sometimes
of
it's
over the edge.
debatable. Like
Yeah.
you
Free
put
labor for
something and it's
Google.
like, but it was there.
Yep.
What if you do hit a situation where you need a CAPTCHA, you're getting spammed, you've gotten on some list or something, use it temporarily. If you need it for a week or two, that's fine. Things go back to normal, I would recommend taking it back off. But a CAPTCHA should be, it's a barrier to your users. And for that reason, it needs to be kind of a last resort type of thing.
Hmm.
On your forms too, it used to be that we would all make every single field required on a form because we want all that information, right? But
Mhm.
really, the less information you require
Right.
from somebody, the less that they
Less
have to
you're
give you.
responsible for it.
You're
Yeah.
less responsible, right? So if all you really need is a name, a first name, and an email address, so that you can respond to them, then you don't need to require their phone number, require their last name,
Exactly.
their blood type, their first name of their firstborn, like all those things that need to be part of that. So the less information that you request from people, the more secure you are as far as managing other people's content and information as well.
I'd recommend these days even, I mean, my site gets somewhere between 500 and 1,000 according to my server logs. I don't actually do even stats on my site anymore because it's not fair to my users' privacy.
Mhm.
But I don't have a contact form at all. I just list my email address on it. You hit the contact button, it opens up a new email window, and I have no problems with email spam on that. Spam catchers are good. You know, with the software processing of spam, the few things that get through are usually legit. And it's not going to my, like if Ellison, if you asked me for my email address, I would give you a different one that was on the website type of thing, right?
Right.
So I can change it on the website if it does start getting spammed a lot. And that does cut down on a lot of issues.
Now there are, of course, times when you do need to ask a lot of different information. Like maybe you're asking somebody wants to be on your podcast and you want to know who they are and why they want to be there and those kinds of things. So you might ask a little more information on a form.
Yeah, with our membership site, that I'm going to think about this now, but it seems we need that information for active members, for active dues paying members.
And there's always valid reasons to collect
Yeah.
information. I don't want to say don't at all, not by any stretch, but if
Right.
it's a blog and you're just starting out, you probably don't need a form field with a form with 4 fields in it. You
Right.
probably just need a subject and a message and how do I get back to you? And
Basically,
that can
what
be
Chris
an
is,
email.
what you're saying is you are a steward of whatever information you collect on that site and you're responsible for it. So if you don't need to collect information, don't collect it. If you do need to, by all means, then of course you're going to. Mary Clark had a question and she posted it in the chat. She said that she thought there was a dollar limit for SSL certificates. Like for some SSL certificates, they couldn't be used over, say, a certain dollar purchase amount. Is there a payment amount criteria for SSLs?
I haven't seen, I don't know if I've ever in my years, and I've been doing this for over a decade. I don't know if I've ever seen that listed. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist because it wouldn't surprise me for a second to find out somebody's telling you that it needs to be that way. Maybe I could see it, especially if maybe a payment processor requires that you have the higher trust level if you're doing a certain amount of dollars. But I could not tell you who it would be, and I work with SSL certificates a lot.
We have customers who are receiving, lots and lots of donations, thousands and thousands of dollars of donations, and we don't have anything about a certain kind of SSL that would need to be in place for that either. So you're welcome.
I just have a quick question here about, you're talking about like collecting information, user privacy, but I think this is a great time to bring up the California Consumer Privacy Act and GDPR. When you want to require people to acknowledge that information is being collected about them and comply with those laws. Like there are plugins available for making sure that they know what's being collected, but managing those is another probably day about learning. But What can you recommend for that?
You're getting into a whole talk.
Yeah, you really could.
When we start with GDPR.
All right.
First thing is on either law or either set of laws, and laws, I'm in Florida and there's pretty much no restrictions at all.
Florida man.
But you have to watch who your target audience is. If you base it off just the legal part, you're going to get yourself really frustrated really fast on most sites. If you start looking at it from a point of view of minimize the data in the first place, GDPR, CCPA, all these compliances become much easier. I didn't prep for a privacy talk, but there is a service with a plug. They have a plugin, and you pay them a little extra, and they will write a privacy policy for you based on the plugins you have installed. There's actually a couple of them like that do a very good job. You need a cookie notice. You need to watch the ability to delete. If you take every piece of information you have, you need to be able to get it back out and allow that user to either retrieve that information so they know everything about them, or delete it. You have to watch in some cases, even the way you're collecting analytics. In Germany, IP address is considered private personal information. So if you're using Google Analytics, that's logging their IP address. Even something like that can. So once again, data minimization is the best I can do in a 30 seconds at the end of a security talk.
You did a great job explaining it so far. Yeah, the user storage bit of it is seems like the most complicated thing, because then you have to access a download site somewhere to get your information back in that case, and that can lead to a whole other can of worms. So yeah, definitely something to consider.
WordPress has some built-in tools with this now, but keep in mind they don't play well with every plugin. So if you have an older membership site, they might not be enough to download your users' data. So you have to be really careful with that. Test them before you advertise the feature.
Right.
Trisha mentioned Termageddon. So we had Termageddon on here.
That's what I was thinking of.
I don't remember which month they were here, but I think it might have been January. Came in and gave a presentation on privacy and privacy policies and terms and conditions, et cetera. And I use them on several of my websites as well for the privacy policies and terms and conditions. They do a really great job.
Again? Oh, yeah. Someone just wrote in the chat. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
That's the one I was trying to think of as well. Yeah.
That's Hans and Donata.
I mean, if you're doing a blog for the sake of writing and educating, like I say, I do a fairly good traffic for a WordPress blog. I have almost no privacy policy. I have no analytics. I have no contact form. I have no comments. I have no cookies. There is no JavaScript used anywhere on the front end of my site. So I don't have to worry about that type of thing of collecting anything. Frankly, it sounds so anti what everybody says. You need this feature, you need that feature. But if the point is that you're blocking these days, I highly recommend trying that route. Not only is it easier from a privacy and trust point of view, but it's also going to mean a faster site in almost every situation, by sometimes quite a bit. There's a 512kb.club, I think is the site, which is sites under 512k. They have a green category for sites that are under 100k fully loaded. And I think I'm the only WordPress site on it, because my entire site is 3 HTTP requests, the header image, the fav icon, and the HTML itself, and that's all. So I don't have, at that point, you have no privacy issues to worry about. If you're blogging and if it's for personal use, I really do recommend going that route.
Trisha posted the link from our meetup when Termageddon was here. The YouTube link, it's in the chat if anybody hasn't seen it and is interested. Thanks, Trisha, for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Trish.
And thank you very much for the answer, Chris.
Sure.
Chris, earlier tonight, you were talking about not sharing accounts between websites. I have one primary account and a subdomain, or I should say one domain and a subdomain. And I do share accounts between the domain and the subdomain. What I'm understanding is I should change one or both of those accounts to be different. Is that correct?
Just one, because you can keep the original for one of them, but I would split it off if it's possible.
Thank you.
Sure. Art, I want to add to that. If this is your personal site that doesn't get a lot of traffic and you're blogging on it daily, it's probably you're not as big a risk as if it's something that you had 18 sites and you just forgot you spun one up as a test, 3 years ago. If these are two sites that, in other words, the ROI for you might not be on there to split off and do all kinds of things. So use it for your situation, not just my blanket split accounts statement.
Thanks.
Alrighty, folks, it's after 8 o'clock here, so
Yep.
I'm sitting under the air AC, so it's getting a little
Freezing.
chilly in here. So I
Chris,
think it's
thank
about
you.
my time to call off.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate that and you being here. And this is awesome. We will have it up on YouTube in the next day or two as I have time. So I'll share that link out with you. And thank you for sharing your slides with us as well. That's really helpful. So, if you were in the room, we'd applaud, but yay, thank you. Really
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much, Chris.
Thanks,
you.
Chris.
Hopefully maybe next year I can
Fabulous.
see y'all in person.
We'd love
Fabulous.
that. Come to WordCamp Rochester the next time we have one.
Definitely.
Sounds good. We got to drag Michelle too.
Cheers, everybody. Y'all have a great night. Thank you for having me.
Have a good
Thank
night. Thanks, Chris.
Michelle,
Yes.
I joined late. Has there been any talk about doing co-working days again, or
We haven't discussed it
Starting
yet
that back up.
because not anything in person yet. But we can probably, I'm gonna guess we'll probably wait another month or two before we do any in-person stuff, just because of getting people vaccinated and having, the ability to spread out and that kind of thing. So we haven't done any virtual co-working because it didn't really fly well when we first started that last year. But if anybody is interested in virtual co-working where we just do a Zoom and just kind of chat and work alongside, we can certainly get something like that up and running.
I've
I would
been
second.
I've been thinking about offering that, Michelle. Not that I would be anything but a host. So
Yeah, we just need to come up with a time and share a Zoom link. And I will say that if you don't have a paid Zoom account, then you do run out of time at about 40 minutes, I think it is.
yeah, I
Whereas
have
like
a paid account right now.
okay, good. Yeah, because the paid accounts you can go for, for a long time. Yeah, so I don't know, Mike, do you want to post something in the group about it and see if people are interested and let you head that up?
Let me check my calendar and I'll do that.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Michelle, I had a follow-up question that was kind of tangential to Chris, but wasn't necessarily directed for Chris.
Sure.
And it was with regards to the SSL certificate. I'm pretty new to this, but it seems like it's hard to discern what's a middle ground between the free SSL and then a paid SSL. Meaning that there's I've got a provider that does not use Let's Encrypt. And so they sell their own, and there are other places that sell them. And then I do see some out there that are really inexpensive. So I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts or suggestions on that, of what's easy to use, what's inexpensive, because it seems like people are saying if you don't really need it for a very significant data flow for your site, it's just a nice check to have on a website. So it doesn't seem like there's a lot of value in buying an expensive one.
I wouldn't think there's a lot of value in buying the expensive one. I think sometimes your host holds you captive on some of those things. So certain hosts only sell the expensive one and won't do Let's Encrypt or a less expensive one. And then you have to decide what you're going to do. I know that I would never recommend not having an SSL on any website, period. Because it just gives people a feeling of security just visiting the site, much less if you have a contact form or anything else like that. So
I'm already convinced on that front. I'm just and my host is willing to use anybody's, but at the same token they sell one. So I'm kind of like, does anybody have any suggestions? What's that middle ground if you can't use Let's Encrypt, but your provider will let you use anybody's? What's something to use out there?
I don't really have another one. I don't know if anybody else has a SSL service they're using other than Let's Encrypt.
I put up Cloudflare on a GoDaddy site a few years ago, and that worked fine until I moved the site over to a non-GoDaddy host.
And that was you paid for that, but it was easy to use.
No, Cloudflare was free.
did you have to update it every few, like, I guess, like Let's Encrypt, I guess, has a manual way if your host doesn't have, isn't set up to handle it.
No, I
So you
didn't
then
need
have to go
to.
and,
I didn't need to update Cloudflare at all. I just installed it, configured it, and it worked. I didn't need to do anything with it.
and it never needs to get updated or recertified?
Well, again, I moved away from that provider, so I moved away from using GoDaddy for that site. So as long as I was hosting that site, that particular site on GoDaddy, I didn't need to update Cloudflare.
And how long was that roughly? Like are we talking months or years?
Many months, many months. How many? I couldn't tell you, Michael.
Okay, that sounds like that might be in that. I got the sense from Let's Encrypt, like it's only certified for so many months. And then with all of the providers that handle it, there's a handshake in which they go and they recertify it every 3 to 4 months.
Well, certainly Cloudflare could have changed since then, but I suspect not. That's just a guess. Cloudflare was free and didn't need to be updated.
Okay.
This was through the pay, the what do you call it, the sell up through the GoDaddy upsell gauntlet. So I was quite proud of that.
All right, thank you.
Other questions about anything? Doesn't have to be security related. We got a few minutes left, or we can have our, yeah, Trevor.
So I have a question, and this is not meant to be a brag. It is a legitimate question. So a while ago, on the order of months ago, my bounce rates were like 98%. And I made a few very minor changes, and now it's around 2% or 6%. Did I really do something right, or did they change what bounce rates mean sometime? Did they switch the good number versus the bad number?
Is your traffic still the same?
It's actually better than it was.
Okay. I don't know that they've changed anything, but
who are they?
definitely.
Who are you hosting with, Trevor?
I am hosting with SiteGround.
Oh yeah.
Are you looking at bounce rates through SiteGround, or are you looking at Google Analytics?
I'm looking at Google Analytics.
Yeah, I would Google that and find out if they've made a change.
I mean, but yeah, I just was hoping that they didn't change the meaning, because it's almost exactly flipped.
Yeah.
I thought the changes that I made would put me maybe at 50%, but it seems like, and one of the things I did was I put a link to related information on my page that was getting a lot of hits.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that going to some other page on my site was enough to make a huge dent in that. But it just seemed, the other option would be that they changed what bounce rate means, that 100% is good and 0% is bad.
I don't think so. I don't think that's the case.
You're just that good, Trevor. That's all there is to it.
Maybe. I learned something at one of the meetings.
Awesome.
1 minus.
Other questions, other topics, anything?
A question on what Chris was saying about changing, like I think he said changing the WordPress backend. Did he mean like having a different URL, like other than WP login? So like your site isn't like directly like on the most obvious.
So I used to do that too. So if I had a website that was like worksbymichelle.com/WP-admin, I changed it to like worksbymichelle.com/it's me. And like you could, if you went to WP-admin, you got a 404 page. But yeah, we all did that for a little while, and then it was like, yeah, that's not really doing anything. So.
Oh, they don't do that anymore. Interesting.
No.
I mean,
It
there's
was
always
like
the
a big
possibility
thing for a
like
while.
bot can like wander onto the website and try to get a page that doesn't exist, but if it gets to the login page, it'll say got the login page and report that back. But so still something to keep in mind, but I don't know. Doesn't seem like it's a threat right now. I don't know.
I stopped doing it.
I mean, there's no problem with that, but it's just that bots, you know.
Yep. All right.
I,
Well,
I have
next,
I have a quick question.
sure.
Trevor and I talked about recently. Does anybody know that if you have a bunch of images that are in your media library, but they're not being used on your site, do they affect your page loading speeds?
I can't imagine why.
They're all part of your site.
They might be hooked into your theme still, so they might be cached somewhere. It really depends, though.
But I can't imagine that I'm wrong too.
I mean, I guess it depends on whether or not somebody's already cached your site and how fast things are loading there. Even if you change out pictures, the page load speed should still be good. But somebody who's visiting your site for the first time might still end up with a slower site, because the more things you have on your site, the more things you have to read through. You know, and there's no scripting on those pictures and things like that, but you're still like, the more plugins, everything will tend to slow a site down. So your best bet is, if you're not using them, to get rid of them anyway. But yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to make that big a difference on your page load.
Okay.
Is there a tool that will look at all my images and tell me which ones aren't being used anymore?
Yeah, you can do that in WordPress. It already has a way to do that in WordPress, where you can just look and see which ones are not attached to pages.
Do not rely on that.
I don't rely on it, but it lets me.
That will bite you so bad.
Well, right. I mean, I don't automatically delete them, but I use that to start weeding through and see what's, what may or may not be connected to something.
Yeah. So for anybody that doesn't understand it, when you load the photo through a post, it'll show it as attached. But if you load it to the media library and then attach it to a post, it will not show it as attached. If you load it to the media library and then embed it into your most likely page builder, it will not show it as attached. So if you make a change, save that, do it through FTP, save the file so that you can put it back when it breaks.
Do it through SFTP, right?
There you go.
And where's that tool, Michelle? Like, where do you see it? That it like if you go to your media library, do you see something that shows you where it's attached?
I'd have to look.
I mean,
at
even
it.
if it's wrong, like you said, as a first.
In the media library, just switch your view from grid to list.
Okay.
You can also, for images that you upload through the media library, you can attach them manually. So I require all of my local site administrators to do that with all their photos, under penalty of they'll be removed if they don't.
There you go.
And then require them to remove the images that aren't attached to a page.
Yeah.
Okay. And if I could ask one more question regarding images and sizes. If you bring up, let's just use an example. Let's say a gross example. Let's say you put an image up on your site that's a meg, and then you size it from a given page, and you size it so that it ends up being, say, 50K. But the image was 1 meg. Does anybody have an opinion on whether or not when it loads that page, if it's as slow as the 1 meg or as fast as the 50K, or if it's something in the middle?
Steve, Organic turned me on to Insanity, I think it was, right, Steve? A few years ago, and with Insanity, and I think there are others like it too. When you upload images, Insanity will automatically create multiple sizes for them. So in the end, I'm guessing you're winding up with maybe even occupying more space than you started with, but the optimal, if I understand it correctly, and Steve, correct me where I'm wrong here. I think the idea is that the optimized image, the image that's best, that's optimal for the use on the page where it's being referenced, will be used from your set, and it will therefore load more quickly. How did I do, Steve?
Pretty good. Pretty. I
Good.
think.
Okay.
I think that's actually built into WordPress now too. I
Right.
think that's an option that you can turn on, because in some situations you just want a thumbnail that you want to transfer on the screen, or you might want the full res image, like in the case of Jim's site where he wants to show a full res image of one of the spindles or something. You might want to click on it and get a bigger image of it.
Right. Okay, so I did a bunch of tests with this myself. So I have my answer also, is that I loaded up images, resized them inside WordPress, and then took speed tests. Then I went through and got rid of all of those images, re-uploaded optimized images that were exactly the size that they displayed, went through, and there was no change.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't know if I was doing something wrong or what was happening. This is kind of something that my friend Trevor went and looked up and saw for me. But when I did these tests, I couldn't find a change.
Just
And
clear the cache in between.
I did clear the cache in between, and I also even ran them through a file compressor, tiny PNG, of the images, and still couldn't find a speed change. And then I had somebody else also do a test from their computer looking at it and also clearing the cache. And I was pretty surprised, and I'm wondering if I did something wrong. So thank you for that.
So what I'm gathering out of this is that, 4 years ago, like, for WooCommerce, I'd spend a lot of time editing my images down to 500 by 500 pixels, 72 DPI. Now, excuse me. Now, as Kathy's working on one of my other sites, she's like, oh, I just put the images in full and smash them, and in a way they go down, and it sounds like the technology within WordPress is advanced to the point where you can use some decent size images now, and it will size them down to the appropriate size. Is that a fair statement?
That's what I'm seeing there. It seems like it does that. It seems like when it offers, because you upload the image and then it gives you 3 sizes, but then it also lets you resize it, and it seems to discard that other data other than whatever you've chosen.
St. Trevor. Oh, all right, guys, let's move the rest of this conversation back over to Facebook. It's 8:30, almost 8:30 at night. I've been sitting at this desk since 8:30 this morning, and I haven't had dinner yet. So if you're all okay with it, I want to go home.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
everybody
very
for
much.
being here.